The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Is he Little Mike? Oh, we had Baby Jordan before, many years ago. Lasted 4 years in the NBA. Anthony Edwards is in his fourth year, and he's going to play a lot longer. But are we ready to make that comparison yet? He was spectacular over the weekend, no question about it. But it's a 7-game series, and we'll have to see, as we say in our business, how it all plays out. Yep. We'll get to a few other things today. There was a roast last night for Tom Brady, which we will unpack a little bit. A couple of epic rants on Friday. One from Mike Wilbon crushing LeBron, and one from Nick Wright crushing Patrick Beverly. Both of them extremely well done and shining a spotlight on some real issues in the NBA. We'll get to that and a whole lot more. I was away from the television this weekend. I was involved in an event that had me sleeping in a yurt. And if you don't know what a yurt is, look it up. It's kind of a circular tent, more permanent than a tent, but more temporary than a cabin. And it was a charitable event that I've been involved with for a few years now, and it kept me away from the television. I'm not looking for a pat on the back here. I'm just explaining that I wasn't able to see a lot of things and had to catch up on highlights and so forth last night when I got back, including the Kentucky Derby, which we'll get to, and seeing the highlights of Little Mike. At least he's Little Mike for now. We'll see what happens at the end of the series. But the breakout star of these playoffs is definitely Anthony Edwards. Wow. Just spectacular on Saturday night. And we'll get Charles Barkley's take on that as he talked to Dan Patrick last week about where he stands right now on the hierarchy. Also, Jerry Seinfeld has been promoting the hell out of this movie, Unfrosted, about the making of Pop-Tarts. And he was on the Rich Eisen show on Friday or Thursday, I forget which day, but told a couple of really enlightening stories, including one of the classic Seinfeld episodes where Kramer hits a golf ball and it lands in the blowhole of the whale and the whale gets beached. And the story behind the story is really fun to listen to, and we'll get to that coming up in the next hour. Let me start with the Kentucky Derby, which, again, I just saw the race highlights it's silly to say race highlights of the Kentucky Derby since it lasts 2 minutes. I watched the race and the photo finish and Mystic Dan winning the 150th running of the Kentucky Derby with 20 horses in the field. I mean, it was as good as it gets for horse racing. The ratings were spectacular, best since 1989. There was more money bet on this than any other, and it was up like $30 million from last year. So people are clearly still interested in this. But the whole Triple Crown series has been kind of tossed on its ear. And whether or not they can get it to resemble what has gone on for nearly 150 years, I don't know. It's going to be tough to do because horses are run differently now than they used to, and they don't run them very often, so they're not trained to come back in 2 weeks, which is the way it's set up with the Preakness May 18th in Baltimore. And the latest is the trainer, Kenny McPeak, the trainer of Mystic Dan, has said he is not quite sure what he's going to do with his horse. The normal layoff is 5 weeks, and 5 weeks would be the Belmont, which, by the way, is not being run at Belmont Park this year because of renovations at the track. They're going to run it at Saratoga, and what's truly significant about that is it's a shorter distance. The Belmont is 1.5 miles. That is the longest of the 3 legs of the Triple Crown, the biggest test, and we're going to have now a race that's 1.25 miles. It's slightly longer than the Preakness, which is 1 3/16 miles, but it's not 1.5 miles. And so having it on a different track, what does that mean for the whole Triple Crown? But it may be a moot point because Kenny McPeak is talking about not running his horse. And it reminds me of this. I am far from a horse racing expert, but I have covered a couple of Kentucky Derbies and Preaknesses. And the first one that I did was for UPI back in 1985. And I went to Churchill Downs, first time I'd ever been there. And the morning of the race, the deal is you got to go down to the barns and you talk to the trainers and you talk to the jockeys and you find out if there's any last-minute issues with the horses and whether or not there'll be a late scratch or anything like that, track conditions, etc. So you have all that. And then you have the whole day before the race starts. It's even later now. They used to run it at 5:30. I think it's after close to 7 now. But, you sit around the rest of the day and you watch the other races and you're waiting for the big race, the Kentucky Derby. So I see this horse down there in the barns and I go, wow, that's a really good-looking horse. Now, I don't know bupkis about horse racing, but I think, I got to bet that horse, right? It's the thing to do. And then we got closer to the race, and I'm listening to more and more of the racing people talk about it. Andy Byers there, people who know the sport inside and out. And I choked. I didn't bet Spend a Buck. I bet the favorite. I don't even remember who it was, but Spend a Buck turned in the second fastest Derby time of all time, behind Secretariat. I mean, this was a truly legitimate Triple Crown contender, and we had not had a Triple Crown winner, I believe, since 78. So, 7 years, and it would seem significant. However, at that time, there was no big bonus for winning the Triple Crown. Now it's millions and millions of dollars. In those days, they didn't have the bonus for the Triple Crown. So the owners of Spend a Buck got more money to run them in something I don't even think it exists anymore, the Jersey Derby, which was either the same week as the Preakness or the week before or the week after, whatever it was. There was no way they were going to run Spend a Buck in the Preakness. We had no Triple Crown winner, and that, kind of changed the game to where we are now. But we don't have it at Belmont Park for the Belmont, and the way things are going in Baltimore, it looks like they're going to stay at Pimlico, but there's $400 million being dumped into renovations for the track, and it seems silly for one race a year. And the bigger issue is, and this is what McPeak is dealing with here, these horses are not trained to run in a 3-week period. 2 races in 3 weeks, it just is just too much for the horse. So they may have to change the schedule. If they change the schedule, that means you can't run the Belmont 3 weeks later. So, maybe you're stretching it into the 4th of July. I mean, you're breaking big tradition here. You're not just breaking a little tradition, you're breaking big tradition. And we'll see what happens. But this year, and we may know more this week, as McPeak says he's going to look at his horse and make a determination, but we may be out of the Triple Crown business by like Wednesday or Thursday of this week. That's entirely possible. Maybe he stretches it out to next week, but he's got to make a decision when to take the horse to Baltimore if, in fact, he's going to run him in the Preakness. So we'll see how that plays out. How about this? And I did not watch this last night. This was a Netflix special, I guess, and it was a roast of Tom Brady. From what I read, it doesn't look like there's any charity involved. It's just Tom Brady making a lot of money, and I don't know if his roasters got paid to show up. But there's a few takeaways from this. If you watched it on Netflix, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you have not watched it, here are some of the things that people are jabbering about who watched it today. And one of them was something that maybe went a little too far. I mean, from what I've read and from what I've seen, it was almost impossible to go too far. But it seems that Jeff Ross, a comedian, did. He was among those who was the roaster among the roasters, and took a shot at Tom Brady, who, as we all know, was drafted 199th in 2000. And he said, Tom became a Patriot, moved up to New England, and on the first day of training camp, that scrawny rookie famously walked into owner Robert Kraft's office and said, I'm the best decision your organization has ever made, Ross said. Would you like a massage? And then Ross blew a kiss to Bob Kraft, who was there. And that's when Brady got out of his seat, and I don't think there's any audio of this, but it's I guess from the lip readers, it's pretty clear that Brady said to Ross, don't say that S again. That was the Bob Kraft arrest with charged with soliciting prostitution in February of 2019, and he was later acquitted of that because the judge ruled that the recordings were used illegally and the surveillance had to be destroyed, so he got off the hook for that. But that's apparently going too far. But everything else, again, fair game. And Brady said before the event, he said, it's like a football game. You run with a game plan, and then you get to see how the strategy goes, and then you adjust on the fly. This is what a locker room has been like for me all these years, so it's not like I'm used to people not making fun of me. So there's that. Kevin Hart, the comedian, went off early on his ex-wife, Gisele Bundchen, saying, Gisele gave you an ultimatum, Hart said. She said, you'd retire or we're done. When you got a chance to go 8-9 and all of it cost you as your wife and kids, you got to do what you got to do. So he did come out of retirement in 2022. I don't know if that was the end of the marriage, but probably was not a help there. And then Hart got Kraft and Bill Belichick to take a shot together, and then Kraft said, unlike many family reunions, there are some people I am desperately trying to avoid. That was funny. And then Peyton Manning jumped in. He said, honestly, it's great to be here with a bunch of people sitting around talking smack about Tom Brady, or as we call it in the Manning family, Thanksgiving. Belichick appeared at the beginning of the roast during a pre-taped segment, and when he told Brady that he was starting the roast instead of Drew Bledsoe. You know, little joke about Brady beating out Tom Bledsoe. Not Tom Bledsoe, but Drew Bledsoe. This was Belichick with a little shot at Rob Gronkowski, who, of course, was there.
Gronk, I've been watching on Fox NFL Sunday, and I'm begging you, please, stop doing your job. Do another job. Do somebody else's job.
Brady took a shot at Belichick. He said, I've been out of the game for a minute. I'm curious, how many Super Bowl rings have you won since I left? Maybe it's just not the guy on the sideline. When I go to the Indianapolis 500, I don't ask the winning driver, hey, who gassed up your car? Ooh. And this seems to be the most talked about line of the night. This is from Tom Brady regarding Deflategate. Which cost him the first 4 games of the season. They went on to win the Super Bowl that year. But there was $20 million spent by the league investigating this. So this was Brady's line minus one keyword, which has been edited out.
We got so many great football greats here tonight. But where's Roger Goodell? Remember Deflategate? The NFL spent $20 million and found that it was more probable than not that I was generally aware that someone may have deflated my footballs. You could have just given me the $20 million and I would just told you I did it.
So that went over pretty well. And again, it's the shots that were at Brady were pretty hard. And I assume he did it for money. There's no indication that there was a charity involved. And Brady's due to make $37.5 million doing games on Fox this year. You know, and maybe we'll get to this today. If we don't get to it today, we'll get to it tomorrow. There was a big feature story that was done on Stephen A. Smith in yesterday's post by Ben Strauss. And when you read the whole thing, you get the impression, and I think this is probably true for athletes and people who become big media stars like Gronk. Excuse me. It's all about the cash. It's how you keep score. It's how much money you make. And it looks like McAfee is the leader in the clubhouse now at like $15 million a year, which is what he's being paid by ESPN, but he has to produce his own show, so he has to pay his people and so forth and so on. So, it's hard to tell on that. But Stephen A. is trying to become that guy and more, and also get into politics, get into movies. His philosophy is the louder you say it, the more effective it is. And, his is about keeping score with money. I would imagine that Brady is looking at this in the same way. I think Brady is probably looking at Michael Jordan, who's a billionaire, who just prints money every day with whatever's sold at Nike under his Jump brand name. And then got something like $3 billion when he was involved in the sale of Carolina. And then you've got the Hornets. And then you got Magic Johnson, who was, before anybody else, out in front on this. So I think it's a race to collect as much money as you can and maybe buy a team. And that's, Brady maybe is looking to become the football version of Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. I mean, it looks that way. Why else would you do something like this? Unless it was a favorite charity. And again, I don't have any indication that was the case. So there's that. Well, I got a second here. Let me throw this in before I forget. Don't forget mentioning this before the end of the show. Bob Abellini passed away over the weekend. He was 70 years old, died of cancer. And most people remember him, if they do remember him, with the Chicago Bears in the 1970s. In the same draft that Walter Payton went in the first round, Bob Avellini out of Maryland went in the sixth round. And he was sort of a symbol of Bears quarterbacking over the years. Good enough to get him to the playoffs, which he did in his third year in the league, but overall a very, very mediocre, and that's being kind, NFL quarterback, where in 9 years with the Bears, he threw 33 touchdown passes and 69 interceptions. And post-football, his career was marked by multiple DUIs. He went to prison 10 years ago because he was driving with a suspended license after like his sixth DUI. I mean, he had some issues and sadly passed away of cancer at the age of 70. But I would want to note to you, if you are a local college football fan, that the rise of Maryland football was not really on the shoulders of Bob Avellini, but included Bob Avellini. And after years and years of being a really down program, they tried Roy Lester, who's one of the greatest high school coaches we've ever had in this area, coached at Richard Montgomery and Magruder, among other places. They tried him as a college coach for a few years. Didn't work out. And so when Jerry Claiborne arrived from Kentucky in the early 70s, things turned around. And he was the quarterback of back-to-back bowl teams that won like 8 games each of those 2 years, 73 and 74, with Randy White, the best player on the team, won the Outland Trophy and was taken in the first round of the draft by the Dallas Cowboys. But it was Avellini who was the quarterback of those teams. And look, his career stats at Maryland, not all that impressive. Threw for 3,000 yards, 15 touchdowns, but 25 interceptions. And he was also splitting some time. He played. Al Neville was the quarterback for a few games there. Ben Kennard started some of them. So he didn't have a spectacular career. But if you want to look at when Maryland football took a step up in the early 70s and what Jerry Claiborne did for the program and what Bobby Ross, one of his, I think he was on his staff. If not, he replaced him and kept it going there into the 80s. You look at Bob Avellini. So I would just say that if you're old enough to remember Maryland football in the early 70s and, of course, the Chicago Bears in the mid-70s, it was Bob Avellini as the quarterback. It was Bob Avellini who was first handing off to Walter Payton when the nation went, whoa, where did he come from? Jackson State? Really? Never saw him play. He's a hell of a football player. So there you go. All right, coming up, Charles Barkley with some thoughts on the NBA playoffs and his circumstance as well. We're looking at a Hall of Fame crew that could be out of work depending on how these contract negotiations go, with TNT possibly bowing out of the NBA after next year. We'll get to that more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
70 years ago today, a record that many said would never happen, happened. The 4-minute mile barrier was broken by Roger Bannister. That may not seem like a big deal today, but, that was a big deal 70 years ago. We'll get to that. We talked a little bit about the Kentucky Derby. We started the show. If you're just jumping in your car, the numbers, viewership, highest since 1989. They say viewership peaked at 20 million viewers between 7 and 7:15. The race started, I guess, just before 7 o'clock, so the end of the race and the post game where they have the woman on the horse who interviews the winning jockey and all that. And for whatever you want to say about the death of horse racing, it's not indicative in the viewership. People are watching this. Maybe it's because it's so consumable. It's only 2 minutes. They have shortened baseball games, but you have to invest at least 2.5 hours in hockey and basketball games. And, of course, NFL games go more than 3 hours. Maybe that has something to do with it. But, 20 million people, that remarkable NCAA women's number that they got for Caitlin Clark was 18, and that was in a kind of similar time slot, a Sunday afternoon. This is a Saturday early evening, and you got 20 million people watching the Kentucky Derby. Pretty cool. Charles Barkley is about to become or could become a free agent depending on how things shake out, but it looks like it's heading in that direction. If you haven't been following what's been going on with the negotiations on the NBA contract, they have a deal in place with ESPN. So ESPN has his package, and they televise the finals on ABC. But TNT has its own package and has had it for many years and has developed the greatest studio show in the history of sports with the Countdown Show with Ernie and Chuck and Shaq and Kenny. They're all in the Hall of Fame. That's how good they are. And they had an exclusive negotiating period which has ended. They were paying $1.5 billion to have the games. And that negotiation period ended without a deal. So now Peacock, NBC, they've stepped up, and they're going to pay $2.5 billion. Turner still has the right to match. That hasn't happened yet. It doesn't appear that's going to happen. Once it happens, it means Charles Barkley is in great shape because he's a free agent. He can have a bidding war between NBC and ESPN, or he can even include Turner if they want to keep him. So he's sitting pretty, and he explained on the Dan Patrick Show last week exactly how that all came out.
We had a disagreement when I was redoing my deal 2 years ago about, well, what happens if we lose to NBA? And they're like, well, we don't know. And I said, well, what does that mean, you don't know? And I want to put myself in the best possible scenario. And I said, I want to be a free agent if we lose to NBA. And they said, no way. I said, no, there's going to be a way. And I said, guys, I'm not signing a new contract unless I can be a free agent in 2 years. Now, I want to make it clear. I love TNT. I love everybody at TNT, and they've been great for me. But I don't want to be in limbo if we lose to NBA. That wouldn't be fair to me. Like, there's no person watching this show right now want to be like, I don't have a job and know what I can do. I want to make it perfectly clear, if y'all lose to NBA, I want to be a free agent. So that's the situation now. And I can say that. I hope we sign the NBA. I love TNT, but it's nerve-wracking over here right now.
That is what you call leverage. No, I'm not signing. Oh, well, we want you to sign. No, not going to do it. And he would have had plenty of places to go if he didn't sign the deal. So they signed him to that deal, and that also, I guess, hurts them in negotiations too, in that they don't have him necessarily locked up like you could say to another network bidding on it. Well, you may get the NBA, but you're not going to get Charles Barkley. And Charles Barkley is the hottest analyst in television right now because he speaks his mind. Now, we'll get to what he said about Anthony Edwards. If you watch the game on Saturday against Denver, it's shed a whole new light on the playoffs, the way he's performing right now. But we got the Knicks and the Pacers starting up tonight. And the Knicks, kind of a surprise moving on. And he was asked, are the Knicks really at this point, can you consider them, after what they did to Philadelphia, a great team?
No. Brunson's a great player. He's unbelievable. Everybody gave me a hard time this year when I said that's one of the great free agent signings of all time. Kenny says, like, what about LeBron and what about KD? I said, yeah, those guys are all-time greats. But Bronson is one of the great signings in NBA history. I don't even think the Knicks thought he was going to be this good. The Knicks didn't even think that.
Yeah.
They thought when they signed him, there's no way they thought he was going to be this great as a player. So, hey, man, he's a great kid. I don't know him well, but I'm happy for him, period.
Sometimes when you have that team that, the sum of the parts makes it a really good team, they're not necessarily a talented team, but they know what to do and when to do it. And I think those are dangerous teams sometimes, where sometimes you rely on stars. Other times it just everybody knows we have to do this every single night. We can't take nights off.
Well, I think that the one thing I always say, every player in the NBA is a good player. Every player in the player, they're not all all-stars or superstars, but everybody in the NBA is a good player. And you factor in, he's that guy. Every team has a guy who everybody follows.
Yep. We'll see if Jalen Brunson is that guy tonight. Got game one of that series taking place in New York, and then they will play game two on Wednesday before the series would shift to Indianapolis. Now, to Anthony Edwards, and once again, I'm working off of highlights, didn't watch the game, and unfortunately, as they play game two of the series coming up tonight, it's a 10 o'clock start, and I probably won't be seeing that. In fact, we'll see game four for sure. That's an 8 o'clock start on Sunday, but these damn games that start so late doesn't work for me. Just doesn't work for me. Anyway, Edwards in this game was terrific. He had 43 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. He had 25 in the first half. Just unstoppable, and taking his game to a level where people are now, and it seems like blasphemy, but people are making Michael Jordan comparisons. And we've yet to hear Jordan come out of the woodwork and go, whoa, wait a minute. No, Anthony, you got to be kidding me. But he is at that level, it appeared. And he's 6'4". Jordan was about 6'6". Harold Miner, you may remember, came out of USC in 1992, 12th pick of the draft by Miami, 6'5". He lasted only 4 years. He wasn't Baby Jordan. This is a little different. Edwards, while he was the number one pick of the draft in 2000, in his 1 year at Georgia, he had as many turnovers as assists. He launched up a bunch of shots. He looked like he had great potential, and many said he is the best talent in the country, but didn't show any of this. Well, now he's in his 4th year, and he has taken it to a completely different level and looks like, could he be Mini Mike? Is he that good? Is he that good? As a column in the Post today says, Edwards has emerged as the breakout player of this postseason. Here in the most important game of his young career in front of a hostile crowd, would he choose to bear the full weight of adversity on his shoulders? Rather than reverting to hero ball, Edwards bided his time in the third quarter. Karl Anthony Towns, invisible to that point, scored 5 quick buckets out of the break. Mike Conley, scoreless at halftime, added 4 baskets in the period. The Timberwolves shot 74% and scored 33 in that third quarter, frustrating the Nuggets defense with their ball movement and outside shooting. So he's almost Michael Jordan in like year 5 or 6, that he's gotten past. Remember we used to talk about Jordan as a ball hog, and at one point he talked about the other players on the team as supporting cast, and people went, oh, how could he say that? That's what he became. Edwards is not necessarily a shoot-first guy. He's 6'4". He hits mid-range turnarounds. He hits threes. He's got a complete game, and he passes the ball. But as far as the Jordan comparisons, and this was Barkley before game one of that series the other night, this was last Friday, this is Barkley with his look at Anthony Edwards and what he's seen out of him.
When can we start making any kind of comparison with Anthony Edwards to Michael Jordan?
Oh, in 5 to 10 years.
Oh, I can't do anything now of starting his career and Mike starting his career?
Well, Mike averaged, people forget, he averaged 38 a game back when you could really knock the hell out of people. He averaged 38 points a game. People forget that. And then, Anthony, who I love. He don't have to go through the bad boy pistol when they just beat the hell out of you 3 or 4 years in a row. I love Anthony Edwards. I love his mentality. I love one of the best things I've seen on television this year was when he was with Scott Van Pelt, and he says, I'm just going to kill everything in front of me. I haven't seen but 2 players in my NBA career that said that, and that's Michael and Kobe. They didn't care about anybody. They didn't want any friends. They didn't want any frenemies. They just wanted to kill everything in front of them. I love Anthony Edwards. He's my favorite player in the NBA now because all these guys out here want to hug and kiss and sing Kumbaya. Anthony Edwards just want to kill everything in front of him. I love watching him play.
Isaiah never tried to kiss you, did he?
No, Isaiah was, I feel bad for Isaiah because he's the best little man ever until Steph Curry. He never probably got the credit or respect that he deserved. And so I feel bad about it. I got nothing but respect for Isaiah because, like I say, he's the best little until Steph Curry came along. And I'll be honest with you, if I was in a game, if I had to choose, and I love Steph Curry, and I know people are going to go on the internet because they ain't got no life. If I had to choose between Steph Curry and Isaiah, I'd probably go with Isaiah in a scenario. But I love Steph, I love Isaiah. But if I had one guy, if I had to choose between those two, I'm not going to ever choose against Isaiah.
Were you involved in the discussions with the Olympic team of not wanting Isaiah? Were you around that conversation?
Never. They never asked me.
You never heard? Did you hear?
Never. So I'm glad you asked me that, because every time I hear that BS, like, no, man, they never asked me. Should Isaiah have been on the team? Probably. But I was never asked. And, like I say, obviously, it's come out a couple of times that Michael didn't want him on the team. I think Jack McCallum came out with a quote last year saying, and he had it on the record that Michael didn't want Isaiah on the team. That's between them. But no, I was never asked about Isaiah on the Dream Team.
All right, so I just left that Isaiah stuff in at the end because it's just another denial of a story that's been told over and over and over again, that there was a vote to keep Isaiah off the Dream Team. Whether Michael said, I won't play, if he plays, who knows? But, man, we're talking ancient history now. I mean, that was 1992, so we're 32 years removed from that. Back to this opening game of the series between the Timberwolves and the Nuggets. The best player in the finals last year, the best player in the playoffs, arguably the best player in the league, Nikola Jokic. Minnesota had an answer for him, too. Jokic in this game played almost 41 minutes. He was 11 of 25 from the field. He had 9 assists, and he did have 8 rebounds. He did not have a triple-double, but came pretty close to doing that with his ability to score a little bit. I mean, a little bit for him, 32 points. But, again, he missed 14 shots from the field and had his problems with what they did defensively. And he was asked about how they were able to adjust to him and how they were able to control him to a degree as the Timberwolves were able to win this game by 7.
What's the adjustment that you can make to, Rudy Gobert's length and, not only that, them just rotating 3 fresh bigs on you, for most of the game?
To have a duplicate clone of myself, and then I can be fresh. When they sub another guy, I'm going to be fresh. I don't know, my friend. I think that's why they're good. They can play big. They can play small. They can put a lot of guys on a lot of guys, and they're long, physical. They rebound really well. They're aggressive. I'm satisfied with the shots that I took. Some of them I missed, some of them I made. It's a tough game, and they're a really good defensive team.
Duplicate clone of myself. So we got game 2 coming up tonight. Game 4, Minnesota on Friday, and game 3, Minnesota on Friday. Game 4 will be Sunday, maybe the most watchable of the series since it tips off at 8 o'clock. Coming up in the next hour, a couple of epic rants on the NBA, one from Mike Wilbon and one one from Nick Wright on what happened with Patrick Beverly last week. If you missed that, I'll fill you in on that as well in the next hour, plus a couple of Jerry Seinfeld stories that are sports-related as he promotes his movie Unfrosted. All that's still ahead. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. You know what the record is for the mile? Yeah, the mile run. It's 3 minutes, 43.1 seconds. There was a period of time where that was thought to be an impossibility. In fact, 4 minutes was an impossible. A 4-minute mile? A sub-4-minute mile? Are you kidding me? 70 years ago today, Roger Bannister ran it. Yes, I'm too young to have seen it, barely. But it was really significant, and we'll look back on it later this hour. Mike Callow sits in for Tony today. Got a couple of Seinfeld stories to tell in the meantime. And a little bit of NBA yak as we are now into the next round of the playoffs, and an eye-opener over the weekend as Anthony Edwards, the Ant-Man, Mini Mike, as he's being called, was just spectacular in Minnesota's opening game win over Denver. They play game 2 of the series tonight. If you're a night owl, you can watch it. It tips at 10 o'clock. And we'll see if he can continue this. And, adjustments are made in playoff games, and we'll see what kind of an answer Denver has. And maybe they overlooked them a little bit since they beat them last year in the playoffs. But Minnesota looks like a really dangerous team right now. And it's not going to happen. But is it conceivable that we could have an Indiana-Minnesota final? As insane as that sounds, I think the Knicks will beat Indiana. I think the Celtics will wind up in the final. And I think Denver will ultimately wind up in the finals. But some fun basketball to watch. Meantime, no Steph this year, no LeBron, no Anthony Davis, as the Lakers were eliminated by Denver in 4. And if you missed Tim Legler last week on the Tony Kornheiser show, I thought he put it well. He said, look, this Laker team, they're good enough to get to the Western Conference Finals, and they could probably give Denver a series and a break or two here, an injury or so, but you never know. They could wind up in the finals. But they treat the regular season with such disrespect that they get into the playoffs as either a play-in or a 7th or an 8th seed, and they are so far behind in terms of a matchup with Denver in the first round, they just don't compete with them, and they go out early. So who takes the fall for this? Who takes the fall for this Laker team going out in the playoffs where they hadn't made it 2 years earlier? Darvin Ham, who did a good job. Remember the Ham Jam when he played at Texas Tech? He spent some time with the Wizards as well as a player. Had an okay NBA career. But, Davis and LeBron decided that he should go. So on Friday, he was out. And Mike Wilbon doesn't usually do this. He does the NBA pre- and the post-game stuff on ESPN. He has been a lover of the NBA for so many years. Yes, he's a Jordan guy. They're personal friends. He covered Jordan in the peak of his career. But, he doesn't usually lash out at something from the NBA. He isn't critical unless it deserves criticism. And he felt that after what happened to Darvin Ham on Friday, it was necessary to deliver criticism and deliver criticism in a big way to LeBron James.
If you want to be the GOAT, you want to tell everybody you're the GOAT, you're the greatest player of all time, you want to have it on podcasts, you want to have it, then take accountability like one. Do that. There's a social media thing out there now with Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. It shows them after they lost in a series. And it shows the determination. It shows them saying, nope, we weren't good enough. I wasn't good enough. There's been some of that. But there hasn't been nearly enough. If you're the GOAT, you do that. You don't blame this cryptically or backhandedly on Darvin Ham. I don't want to hear from anybody in a Laker uniform that the primary problem was Darvin Ham. Yes, LeBron and Anthony Davis were great in that series, but they weren't good enough against Denver. So take that on. GOAT carries responsibility. I don't see it in the firing of Darvin Ham. So go handpick somebody. They're not getting T. Lue. If you're the owner of the Clippers and you got way more money than the Lakers and just as much ego, you ain't letting T. Lue walk across when you got a new stadium and you got stars. You don't need them to go to him to go to the Lakers. This is infuriating that the hand is behind this move, Frank. It's just intellectually lazy and unaccountable, and those two guys are too great. They're Hall of Famers. You got to be better than that.
So that's Wilbon on Friday with fill-in Frank in for Tony, Frank Isola sitting in. But you don't usually hear Wilbon say those kind of things. Now, the Lakers are looking around, and they're thinking, who do we want here? And speculation is they want Ty Lue. Well, Ty Lue, as Wilbon said, they're not going to let him out of the Clippers. They're going to sign him to an extension. And Jason Kidd, who might also have been on the radar with Dallas, he's signing an extension to stay there. That was announced this morning. It's going to be a multi-year deal. J.J. Redick's name is popping up. And I guess the best way to get an NBA head coaching job is to be on television. And J.J. Redick has been on television. You replaced Doc Rivers, who left the booth to go back to the Bucks, and that didn't work out either. I don't know if anybody can pacify LeBron James, but you have to do something. He's going to play, looks like, for 2 more years. This idea of playing with Bronny, I guess it'll happen if he goes undrafted and they'll bring him in as a free agent. Because, LeBron is also the general manager of the team. He's the coach of the team. And if they don't draft him, another team, then they sign him. Now, the question is, because LeBron has the right to opt out of his deal, if you think you can land LeBron, do you take a chance with Bronny? Do you try to get him? Do you use a first-round pick? He's not a first-round player. He's probably not a second-round player. He needs to go back to college. But it seems like LeBron is backing away from the idea that he has to play with Bronny and is probably going to spend a couple more years with the Lakers. And as others have said, the hell with it. Just say, look, this is your team. You decide who coaches it. You decide who we can get. We do have a salary cap. We're not going to go that far over the luxury tax. But, you do it your way, because it's trying to do it another way and making it seem like it's not LeBron's decision is kind of a joke. We had another situation that popped up, and I mentioned this briefly on Friday. I didn't get into all the details of it. But Patrick Beverly, as his team was being knocked out of the playoffs last week, the Milwaukee Bucks, did a very Patrick Beverly thing. A fan supposedly sitting behind the bench said something like, out of a huddle, 1, 2, 3, break Cabo, because the season was about to end. And he fired a basketball at this guy, and then the ball came back, and he fired it, and he nearly hit a woman. I mean, it was just an awful thing. So then in the locker room, there's a woman who's a producer for ESPN. She's been covering news, she said, for 40 years. And she asked a question that Patrick Beverly didn't like. And he said, "Are you a subscriber to my podcast?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Well, I'm not going to answer your question." And she put her mic up close to his face as someone else was asking a question. He pushed it away, and then she went to ask another question, and he pushed the mic away. I mean, everybody should have left at that point. And so it was just ridiculous behavior. He apologized to her the next day, and she put out a tweet saying that she had accepted his apology. There was also a story that I think was on Front Office Sports that ESPN wasn't going to have Patrick Beverly on anymore. They denied that, and they should not have a ban on him. They don't want to pay him, but you just don't. He's news, and you cover your news network. So they did that. But hopefully there's going to be no NBA to cover with Patrick Beverly. Hopefully at 35, he's played his last game in the league. And Nick Wright, who's part of the shouting show, whatever it's called, on Fox, if you haven't seen him, he's got the long black hair and the long black beard. Looks like John Saraceno used to look back in the day at USA Today. And Nick Wright, in doing his rant, and this is the way you do it, kids, in doing his rant about Patrick Beverly, came equipped with facts and notable moments. He looked like, and he'd done a good job of memorizing this if he didn't read it off a prompter, but this is about as good as a rant gets, as Nick Wright of Fox did a complete takedown of this guy, Patrick Beverly, who has been involved in one ridiculous thing after another.
From when you got to Houston, I was there, you were thrilled to be in the league. Happiest guy in the world, hanging out at Onyx at 3 in the morning with your ridiculous fake chains because you couldn't get into Dreams yet. I understand. I was in a similar spot, buddy. And you went from that to whatever you've become, a delusional, cheap shot artist, misogynistic clown, promoting your podcast at the expense of your career, which, to its credit, let me check, while still behind Andy Roddick's tennis podcast and your own teammates' pod, you are ahead of Bear Grease by Clay Newcomb. So good luck with it. So how did you get here? And how did Pat Bev become a guy that we talk about despite the Basketball Reference page? A creation of your own delusion in Houston. One and done every year that you played. You know how they broke through to make the conference finals? I don't know, but I know you were out that year. Then they didn't have another playoff run till they traded you and then promptly made another conference finals. So what happened then? You went to the Clippers and you beat Kevin Durant in a basketball game and talked about it. And then he promptly dropped 50 on you and reminded everyone who he was and who you were. That offseason, You then declared to anyone who would listen, the next 5 years are mine. Steph Curry's had his time. By the way, those 5 years ended literally last night. It's been 5 years since then. How did that go, those 5 years? Well, the first year, what happened in the bubble? You started the bubble by disrespecting Michelle Roberts in front of your colleagues, and they had to talk you down from it. You ended the bubble by being a key part of the biggest gag job in the last 30 years in the NBA. What did you do the next season? The next year, Ty Lue's big adjustment, the one time the Clippers are going on a playoff run. You remember what it was? Sitting your ass on the bench. That's what turned that playoff run around. How did that playoff run end? Oh, yeah. With Chris Paul having the best game of his life on you, and you dealing with it by shoving a man in the back when he wasn't looking, and then going on TV and calling a legend of the game a cone. What then happened after that? 2022, you won your championship. Unfortunately, it was a play-in game, and you celebrated like it was. And then 2023 to 2024, you have been on the Jazz, the Lakers, the Magic, the Bulls, the Sixers, and the Bucks, and not a single one of them wanted to keep you around. And you ended that tenure by throwing a basketball at a woman's head, getting it back, throwing it at another fan, and then yelling at another woman in the locker room because she doesn't listen to your terrible podcast. So if this was your last moment in the league, good riddance. Won't be missed, won't be memorable. I mean, congrats for creating something out of thin air like the Wizard of Oz that never should have existed, to where you're a guy that's talked about. But unnecessary from start to finish, pal.
Well done. Well done by Nick Wright. And I don't get it. If you're really good or you have a particular skill that's better than anybody else, like Dennis Rodman, you can be a pain in the tuchus. This guy, he's not that good. Why is he still in the league? Why does anybody care about him? And hopefully we've seen the last of Patrick Beverly in the NBA. Ben Strauss with a very good feature story on Stephen A. Smith in yesterday's paper. And you know, I'm kind of baffled by what's happened on the career arc of Stephen A. Smith. I first became aware of him when George Michael would put him on. Remember, George Michael years ago, long before PTI, back in the 90s, had a basketball show called Full Court Press, which filled up the time between seasons for the Redskins. And he always had that great Redskin show that he did every Saturday night, and Wilbon was on it, and Sonny and Riggins, and it was the gold standard for, and they used to have a lot of these Saturday night shows. They had the budget to do it, and so then they switched to basketball, Full Court Press during the season. He had Stephen A. on, and that ultimately led him to other opportunities, and he became a big star at ESPN, became overexposed, and in 2009, they said, that's enough, get out. And he was gone for a year, but he made his way back in, and now is attempting to become a megastar, not just in sports, but in everything. And this is what Strauss writes. Smith has spent more than $1.5 million of his own money renting space and buying equipment. He has launched his show last year through his own production company, Mr. SAS Productions, Stephen A. Smith Productions. Between the control room and the studio, a staff of 15, including graphics editors, a social media manager, a writer, producer, and director, gathers here and in Los Angeles 3 times a week to produce each episode. He's going above and beyond the shouting show that he does every morning on ESPN and doing his own thing. And, well, most people know in business to really make money, you got to be your own boss, and he's attempting to do that. But he's attempting to expand beyond sports. And here's my feeling about Stephen A. He's really good at what he does in terms of getting attention, getting ratings, getting people to watch what he does. That's the main goal when you're in television. There's no question about that. But his knowledge of the NFL is very, very, very slim. He knows the NBA, and he's broken stories on the NBA. To his credit, while he was out of ESPN, working for, I think, Fox Radio, he broke the story that LeBron was going to Miami. He had that before anybody else, and he was going to put together his super team with Bosh and Wade. He had that. So he's got contacts in the NBA. When he gets to other things, you see his knowledge is very thin, and he just shouts a lot, which gets attention. But he regularly appears on CNN and Fox News with his friend Sean Hannity to talk politics, and he guest hosted Jimmy Kimmel's show a few years ago. His ESPN contract expires next year. The exposure, in theory, will make him the highest paid talent in the network, somewhere around $20 million a year. But Strauss writes, cable TV stardom is no longer enough to satisfy him. In an era where the influence of cable bundling is shrinking, when everyone from Reese Witherspoon to the Manning brothers have their own production houses, and when the culture's biggest shapers, including fellow ESPN star Pat McAfee, are on YouTube and Spotify, Smith wants to be a franchise with relevance that spans sports, politics, internet, and pop culture. He wants to be all things. I don't think you can do that. I don't think so. I mean, he can be an expert on the NBA. Why are his takes on politics important? He may read the newspaper like everybody else, but what's his inside knowledge of politics? Has he ever worked on a campaign? Has he ever worked with a candidate? No, he just does it loudly. It says Smith used to be routinely lampooned, the final triumph of bluster and confidence over content, a Sports Illustrated writer once said. But today, his naked-as-ever ambition is more viewed as less an affront to the industry than a fact of life. America has a strange new respect for Stephen A., the Ringer's Brian Curtis wrote in 2019. Now Smith is testing just how much Stephen A. wants, how much Stephen A. America wants or can take. Remember, 2009, there was too much of him. Now we're in a different era, it seems. On YouTube, Smith is trying to take the fame beyond cable and sports. One of his first hires was social media manager Bailey Carlin, who helps create fan interaction debates such as, and they talked about SpongeBob on the show. He didn't know anything about SpongeBob, but he's got a take on that. He has talked about his sex life in various, I've never seen this, but apparently he's done that. One of Smith's ESPN colleagues who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly marveled at the versatility of Smith's takes, noting that the subject didn't matter, from presidential politics to NBA players to cartoons. The vocabulary is the same. The delivery is the same. It's incredible. The question is, how much do people want of this? I mean, if ESPN signs him to a $20 million contract, a year from now, 2 years from now, are people going to say, all right, enough already? You know, it seems like you got to leave the people wanting more. You can't be on all the time. Like when those of us who get away from sports to turn on CNN, we can't have Stephen A. also. It just seems to me. But maybe not. Maybe not. That's not how it works anymore. They write here, in the shorter term, his contract with ESPN expires next summer, and he no doubt will get a raise from the reported $12 million he makes now. Smith declined to comment on his salary. It's difficult to find people in the industry who don't think he will get $20 million or maybe even higher. He's an ESPN brand at this point. Matt Lauer made more than $20 million at the height of his run on the Today Show, and if Smith really wanted to cash in, he would be the perfect replacement for Judge Judy, who earns about $50 million a year. There's also the matter of McAfee. The former punter turned WWE star turned ESPN host fills the daytime slot after Smith. He is not an ESPN employee, producing his own show, selling it back to ESPN for a reported $15 million a year. Since then, Smith has been fixated on that, both the amount and the freedom it affords McAfee, according to people who have spoken with him. This is the way to keep score. It's how much money you are bringing in, and that Stephen A. wants to win this game. Given the way he's advanced here, I don't blame him for doing it. I just wonder what the appetite is going to be for it. The New York Post reported recently that Smith and McAfee got in a shouting match over the phone. According to people familiar with the fracas, it was over McAfee's frustration with his depiction in a forthcoming documentary about the history of debate shows that Smith is producing for ESPN. Well, that's great. A history of debate shows produced by Stephen A. That's like The Last Dance for Michael Jordan. It's from his point of view. Smith declined to comment on the alleged dispute. I got nothing but respect for Stephen A., McAfee said in a text message. And then the question of politics. What are his politics? They says he strikes a defiantly centrist pose, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, as he likes to say. He has said he could never vote for Trump, but has also stated recently on Hannity shows that black voters could relate to the former president because of his legal troubles. That's what the president said, or the ex-president, said. Smith said he would like to have Biden and Trump on his show. Yeah, that'll happen. The candidates may consider it, though, because Adam Mendelson, a former advisor to Arnold Schwarzenegger and current media advisor to LeBron James, said politicians used to go on Johnny Carson and Arsenio Hall. Now sports is such a dominant part of the popular culture, it's hard to deny the power of Stephen A.'s platform. Wow. So, again, baffling, but it seems to be working. It seems to be working for Stephen A. All right, coming up, 70 years ago today, Roger Bannister broke a barrier that many thought would never be broken. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Got Mike Callow sitting in for Tony at 11 o'clock. Before we get to Roger Bannister, it has not been a good few months for Talia Tagovailoa. He is the all-time passing leader in the Big Ten, arguably the best college quarterback that Maryland has ever had. Boomer Esiason had a great career in the pros. Tagovailoa has broken his passing records, played more games, and the game is different now than it was when Boomer played. But he had attempted to get an extra year of eligibility, even though he had been in college football for 5 years, getting the extra year because of COVID. He wanted a sixth year because in the year that he played at Alabama, he appeared in 5 games. Now, the rule in the NCAA is if you appear in 4 or less, you can count it as a redshirt year. He appeared in a 5th game, but it was just for a couple of plays, and it was sort of a ceremonial thing, tribute to his brother, Tua, who had hurt his hip and was not going to be able to play anymore that year, and he came in, kind of as a tribute to him. Well, that counted, apparently, so he did not get another year of eligibility, so now he's looking to play in the pros, did not get drafted, was invited to Seattle's rookie minicamp this past weekend on a tryout basis. Tried out. They decided not to keep him. They're keeping a defensive tackle. Well, that's a good name for a tackle. Buda Jones makes the roster for now, and Tagovailoa is left to look for another job someplace else. The CFL has been mentioned as a possibility for the way he plays, the way he's able to run. But the step up, even if your name is synonymous with winning at Alabama and even having a great, at least a really, really good pro career so far, right now Talia is looking for work, and it did not work out for him with the Seattle Seahawks, which apparently was the only team that reached out, as far as I know. Now maybe somebody else is going to give him a look. The Commanders are going to start their rookie minicamp this weekend, but they're loaded up with quarterbacks. I can't see them giving him an invite. Anyway, it was 70 years ago today that a barrier was broken that some said would never be broken, and that was the 4-minute mile, and it was broken by Roger Bannister, who later became Sir Roger Bannister, passed away in March of 2018. He had gone on to become a neurologist and master of Pembroke College, Oxford, before retiring in 1993. But his story of running goes back to the late 1940s when he was a teenager, and he was selected as an Olympic possible for the London Games in 1948, but he turned them down, said he wasn't ready to compete, and set his sights on Helsinki 1952. And he did well, but not well enough. Didn't win a gold medal, and that's when he began to think about breaking a barrier that few thought could ever be broken. And after he had performed below his standards at Helsinki, he was thinking about retiring from running, getting away from it, but came up with the idea that he could, in fact, pursue the 4-minute mile and would try to break it, and years later described the thinking that went into it.
There was one journalist who said eventually the 4-minute mile will be broken, and everybody thought this was a pretty eccentric view because there was a long way to go. But to me, at that stage, I was only looking ahead to becoming an international. I was immediately involved in the management of the Oxford Athletics, became the secretary and then the president, and I declined the invitation to compete in the London Olympics. In those days, I didn't train very much. We didn't really know how to train in modern terms, and there was this thing called burning yourself out. And I didn't want to burn myself out at 18, and I had a notion that if I looked after myself, trained carefully, I would go on improving, not by training 2 to 3 hours a day, but by training 3 quarters of an hour a day. It seemed to me logical that you could go on improving, and you didn't have to spend all the day running.
45 minutes a day. I don't think that works now, the way they do the stretching and all the other things that are involved in training. But in that in those days, it was enough. So by 1954, he figures he's ready to make a run at breaking the 4-minute mile. And he had some early attempts. January 21st of 54, he ran a 4.02.4 in Melbourne. And then in February of 54, he ran a 4.02.6. And at the end of the Australian season in April, he ran a 4.02.6. He was kind of stuck on that number. So now we get to a race which is on this day in 1954, 70 years ago today, May 6th. It's a dual meet between the British AAA and Oxford University at a track in Oxford. They had about 3,000 people there. You know, if it's like Wilt's record where they had 6,000 and Hershey like 60,000 say they saw it. I don't know how many people claim they were there when Bannister broke the record, but it was touch and go whether it was going to happen. They had winds of 25 miles an hour before the event, and Bannister had said he preferred not to run to conserve his energy and his efforts to break the 4-minute barrier. He would try again at another meet, but the winds dropped just before the scheduled race, and Bannister did run. Now, he had a couple of pace setters in this race. It was broadcast live on BBC Radio, and one of the commentators, this is cool, the cool little nugget, one of the commentators for the race was Harold Abrams of Chariots of Fire. Remember the character that was played in the movie? Harold Abrams, who in 1924 won the 100-meter championship. So this is now, 30 years later, and he's doing the commentary on the race. The race goes off at 6 o'clock, and this is what happens as was described on a BBC newsreel about what happened 70 years ago today.
Up to the finishing line. Time 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds, shattering the 4-minute mile, the Everest of athletic achievement. A great reception for the young medical student who had cut 2 whole seconds off Gunda Haag's world record set up 9 years ago.
I'm very glad to have done it in Oxford, because this was the track on which I ran my first mile race in my life about 7 years ago when I first came up to Oxford. The second is that throughout the winter I've been watching the newspapers, seeing whether Landy would do it first or whether Santee would do it first in America. And I'm very glad that it has come from England in the end.
Yeah, well, the record lasted only 46 days. June 21st, 1954, John Landy in Finland had a time of 3 minutes, 57.9 seconds, which was rounded off to 3 minutes, 58 seconds because of the rules that were in effect. But the first man to get past the 4-minute barrier was Roger Bannister, which, if you look at the record now, you'd say, what's the big deal? It has, though, been 25 years since the record was set, and nobody has broken it since. So maybe this is as far as they can go, or somebody's going to try and train. Doesn't seem to have the appeal maybe that it once had. But 25 years ago, Hikam El Jarouj of Morocco ran 3 minutes, 43.1 seconds. So he ran the race 16 seconds faster. 16 seconds in a mile is a big deal. Now, the women's record is still over 4 minutes. A woman has not broken 4 minutes. You wonder if that can happen. The record for women is 4 minutes and 12 seconds. But in 1999, what was a record of 3:59 was now broken and set. It was broken a number of times before it got to that, but 3 minutes, 43.1 seconds is the record for the mile, and Roger Bannister, the first to do it in under 4 minutes. One thing to finish up with, this is a competition that, well, I mean, they televise anything, I guess. Maybe someday this will be. But we have just had the 51st Annual Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival, a competition in sheep shearing and putting together a shawl from the sheep shearing. Boy, that's a tongue twister. 6 teams have 3 hours to shear a sheep, transform its wool into yards of yarn, then weave those threads into a show-stopping shawl. Well, it's going to be tough to say. They call it the sheep to shawl, and they believe that it's anything but warm and fuzzy. The games begin when 6 sheep go belly up, cradled by seasoned shearers whose job is to shed them as quickly as possible without nicking them with the blade and or even a finger for that matter. The raw wool, unlike yarn that's bought in a store, is coated with a kind of sticky sheep sweat called lanolin. The waxier the wool, the more challenging it is to weave quickly. And this year, more than 20,000 people showed up for this event, and 600 sheep flocked to the Howard County Fairgrounds for 2 days of sheep in all forms, sheared, natural, woolen, woven. There are sheep named Lassie and Landy and Jason, son of Aquarius and Wildfire. Well, I mean, this is a whole new deal. Not a new deal, but a new to me, a deal that I was not aware of. Much of the draw for the humans is the shopping. Sheep grace everything from soap dishes to nightstands, night lights. Wool has been woven into socks and sweaters, and they have colors called Blue Crab and Old Bay, obviously for Maryland. There are even sheep at the food stands. You can buy a $9 lamb burger. So who knew? Who knew you could do this? The judges break out their measuring tapes and clipboards. Shawls must be at least 70 inches in length. They must have a consistent width. They must be a certain drapeability. The teams pack up their supplies and massage their fingers, waiting for the sheep to vacate the show ring, where this year's sheep to shawl winner will be announced. And then they start to auction off the shawls. They start the bidding at $100. Spectators shout out their bids, eager to get their hands on these one-of-a-kind wool creations. After all of that fierce competition, they look especially warm and fuzzy. So there you go. You think that there's not a competition for sheep shearing? Why, there is. And who knows? Who knows how you train for something like this, how this is an ambition that you might have at a young age. I'd like to be the top sheep shearer. But there is, in fact, a competition for you out there if you would like. All right, no baseball tonight. The Nats really playing well. I'm looking forward. I'll see Mike Rizzo tonight. It's the annual Cigars and Curveballs event that's done to raise money for the D.C. Grays. If you can make it out there tonight, it's from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and it's at Shelley's Back Room, which I think is the 13th at F. And we always have a good time every year. We raise a lot of money, and I'll be out there. Kevin Sheehan, I think, will be there. Doc Walker, and, of course, Tom Lavero, who runs this event every year. So I'll give you a recap on that tomorrow, and there'll be no recap on the Nats and Orioles since they're both off getting ready for a Battle of the Beltways coming up on Tuesday. Mike Callow sits in for Tony next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.